I'm excited to share with you my latest painting. It's a 60 by 40 inch wood panel painted with acrylic, and it was created for Elaine Fleck Gallery in Toronto for an exhibit that's happening this March. It's called Woody. You can see why. And what's interesting about this painting is I actually documented it. Although I'm now talking at the end of it, I've recorded myself from the very beginning all the way to the end. And I thought it was a fantastic way to show people my process. It's important to understand what goes into a painting is not just the painting, it's the preparation, it's the drawing, and then it's the hours and hours that you spend doing it. And I want to actually show something more than static photos or small posts or 15-second clips, and really give you an in-depth idea of what this painting is about, what it took to make it, and hopefully if you live in the Toronto area, you'll come see it this March. So where it starts with me is always the rough small sketch, whether it's a thumbnail, a piece of paper, a note, post-it notes. That's kind of where it starts. And then that became a more refined piece. So that's doing something large like this, where I can actually get into some of the details. Now, a lot of this happened in background. There's things that didn't happen. There are things like the foreground trees that never happened. But it helps me actually get the composition and the details in the story that I want to tell. It's a very narrative piece, and I want to make sure I had something to say. From there, it's created on a giant piece of paper, and that becomes my actual piece that I transfer to the wood. But that's done after I've prepared the wood. So this painting itself was actually a large piece of wood. It was a custom-built piece of wood, and it was created by a carpenter in Toronto. And when I got it, I coated it with 2 layers of sealant. I'd use GAC 100, which is a sealant that covers the wood. Gives it a nice strong sealant, and it makes sure that any of the material or chemicals inside the natural wood don't bleed through to the paint. And I painted it with acrylic gesso, 2 layers, one on the top, one on the bottom, on every side of it. Now I don't always do this, but I've started to do it in some of the larger pieces. It both makes a nicer surface, creates a better quality, and it really just tries to make it feel a little more premium. It also protects the outside wood and makes sure that it's uniform. After every coating, I would sand it and then put another coating down. This did add a little bit of weight, but the whole painting is actually still only under 25 pounds. So for a size this big, it's not that bad. The last coat of gesso was actually mixed with cerulean blue. And I did that because I wanted to make sure I had a nice even background to paint on. With a painting this size, the last thing I wanted to do is actually start to blend and worry with a little brush and not get done as fast as I wanted. So covering it with an even layer of a mixed blue and white gesso really helped to bring it on. After tracing it down with pencil, I started painting. Now I usually start with the clouds. Everything I do, I tend to start in the back of the painting. The reason is I want to make sure that I cover everything I've seen and I work my way to the front. It helps make sure that as I'm doing things, I may paint things that only I know are there, and I may cover over large percentages of it, but it helps me to find the depth. Depth in what I do is very important, especially with these large landscapes. I do want you to almost feel like you're lost inside the painting. It needs to feel a bit of an escapism, because that's why I create them. And with a piece this big, the background took a long time, working my way from the clouds, through the hills, through the closer mountains, and then into the detailed trees. The trees themselves, I tend to do little pops of color. I blend them out and I just play with it and work with it. It's less thinking and more just doing, especially to get the main surfaces on, but it really helps try to bring it forward, and it makes sure that I don't do anything dark too far in the background and really let atmosphere push it back. So once I start to get into the midground, that's when I actually start to bring in highlights. It's a bit of Bob Ross, a bit of experiment, a bit of the past 20 years on how I've done things. And I tend to do trees almost always the same. I don't overdo them, I don't overpaint them. I tend to wait till I get to the foreground with the details and the actual branches to really care that much about the trees. This one was unique because I put in pops of different kinds of trees because I had such a large panel to work on. Once I got to the foreground, that's when I started working on the actual individual branches. What I'll tend to do is I'll either start with the branches, then I'll put over top of it the leaf, a darker and then a lighter, and sometimes I'll actually put the darker behind just for the leaf, then paint the branches in the wood, and then over top of that layer in my foreground trees and elements. Now the statue itself is Woody. He is being built, and it's actually based off of, in India, there's the Statue of Unity, which is an almost 600-foot tall statue. And that's what inspired me to do this, to take something that they're currently in the real world idolizing and creating these large structures of, but create it with something that is a little more familiar for us. The roller coaster itself is actually a roller coaster from the Toy Story Land in Walt Disney World. It is the Slinky Ride roller coaster, and it was captured from various photos that I have, and then drawn from scratch and created just based on how it was actually made. The reason for that is I wanted to add a bit of pop into the piece, and I didn't want it only to be this large statue. Now, similar to my other Disney pieces, I tend to have these spaceships in them, these kind of weird zeppelins. And the last ones I've done of the theme parks have actually had little visitors who are exploring and finding the original theme parks in the distant future. This one is a little different, but I still wanted to bring some of that into it. One, I love drawing them and painting them, and I find it just helps bring a sense of visitation to this, a sense of someone is actively making this. Here doing the construction, this was done with little bits and a little brush, and I slowly built it one piece of wood at a time. The whole thing was drawn out before that on top of it, and as I did it, I started to masking tape. I use masking tape a lot. It helps me get my sharp edges, and it really helps me not worry about making mistakes. So here I've masked the actual cranes, and then the reveal of it, if you saw on my Instagram account or my Facebook account, you saw this reveal when I did it, and it's extremely satisfying. It's one of my favorite things to do, because I know when I pull it down, it's going to be nice and clean, and I didn't have to do any other techniques. And with me, I have a slightly shaky hand, so small details, I kind of have to do it. Once the whole crane and all the scaffolding was built, it really became details. It was spent about a week, and I just added things. Worked in things like the truck, the cranes, little hanging ropes. There actually are little bits of characters building Woody. You see them on the scaffolding, you see them walking around elements, and I think that just starts to bring a bit of life to it. You also see when I get to my foreground trees, I take my time. I do slow down, and if I don't like it, I paint it over. And that's where I start to really play with layering of the trees, the layering of the leaves, so that it starts to build that depth. Palm trees, someone that grew up in Florida, it's something that I've always loved. I love drawing them, I love painting them, and I have been trying to work them into almost everything I do of late. This was no exception. They also work as a really great anchor to pull you in because they have so much character. And then the last piece is really the bottom corner. And the bottom corner is a place where we get to see a close-up version of the builders. And these are both a mix of my visitor characters that you've seen in my other works, as well as this time, a Donald. Now, whether that Donald is someone in an outfit or an actual Donald, I picture him more as a mascot or someone who's found the outfit. They are bringing material through the road to the construction. In this piece, they're bringing a large tinker block. The last piece is really that foreground framing. That's the leaves and the flowers. It's used for a few reasons. I do it because I like to actually create a little bit of a frame that brings you into the piece. It allows me to put details on the leaves that then translate mentally from what a leaf looks like to the trees in the background. And I find it has a pop of vibrance. There's nothing worse for me than finishing a painting and just having it blend off and not knowing what to do. And a little bit of foreground foliage really just helps me give a base. Here you see very much what I'll be at the end of the stage of these paintings. I go through a love-hate stage where I hate it about 1/3 through, and then I fall in love with it towards the end. And I spend a lot of time just looking at it and finding out little things I want to play. It's really my favorite time in a painting, is when I get in there and just do little bits, find little things I want to fix. And that's why I can push and pull things, add little elements. A lot of the trees were never in the original drawings, and they were never actually intended to be. And I just found that once I had it done, I really needed to do something. The long hours that you spend painting, this was over 100 hours spent, you can get a little loopy, and kind of get stuck in the dungeon. I do paint in the basement of my house with my children usually asleep and my wife upstairs. And finding joy in doing it is what keeps you actually working. And then the last stage for me on this one, which is something I'm going to be doing on more of my larger pieces, was the edges. This painting is actually going to be framed in a floater frame that's custom built for it, but you'll still see a bit of the edges. It was important to me to make sure that I had a continuation of the work. Similar to what you see in a canvas, I want to continue the story a little bit so that it wasn't a flat color. Although some of my other works are flat colors, I really wanted to make this a more interesting transition because it was going to be framed. And some of the newer work that I'm also doing for later this year is doing the same thing. And of course the last piece is signing the name. I sign with my initials to keep it simple, and I don't do it till I'm 100% sure that I'm happy with it and have kind of put the nail in the coffin. It's when I've committed to it and thought, okay, I don't want to push it any farther. I don't want to make any mistakes in it or regret anything. You know, it's where I'm very content. My past pieces, if you've seen any of the work I've done, or if you followed me or see what I'm working on now with some of my theme park pieces, are grounded in a realistic thing. They're grounded in a theme park, primarily Disney World at the moment. That just happens to be where I started. And they are really about finding that in the future and the staying power of those theme parks, and the idea as a visual story of people no longer being here, and what if visitors came and found them. And that really became that Disney series. But I didn't want to only do theme parks. So this is an opportunity to take that and expand that world. We have the opportunity to have Woody coming up above everything. It's a very large painting, so I can really play with scale. And the construction is ongoing. It's intentional that he is this sort of green metal feel. I didn't want him to feel cartoony. He needs to feel like the Statue of Liberty or like the Statue of Unity. And I want it active. There are little characters walking around in here building him. They're standing up on here, they're walking through it, they're working in the cranes. And then coming across from the other side, you have some close shots of the actual people. I didn't want him to feel like he was finished, so I thought it was very interesting to do this idea of capping him off or finishing him. And that's the hat coming in that's brought in by those same Zeppelin airships. Kind of marry a few things. You're marrying fantasy, you're marrying reality, you're marrying nostalgia, and you're basing it in a realistic landscape or something that's somewhat realistic. I love surrealism. I appreciate realism, although it's not for me, and I like to find ways to bridge it. And that chance to idolize the things that we believe in and the things that we still find joy in is something to be celebrated. It's not something to be looked down on. So what better way to celebrate something and to idolize something than to look at what we do in the real world right now, where we build giant towers and we build giant statues. And I thought, it would be great to actually take things that you idolize that are more personal and nostalgic and relatable and build that. And with that, I'd like to thank you for sitting through the last few minutes and seeing the process and understanding and learning more about Woody and what went into him. If you'd like to see the painting in person, it will be in the Elaine Fleck Gallery in Toronto this March. And I'm really excited for the next year and what's happening more. There are more paintings coming, more Disney theme park paintings, as well as more idols like Woody. And I'm also curious to find out what you are interested in. I'm just starting this journey. I'm starting to play with these concepts, and I want to find out what are idols and things that you like. What are the things that really bring you back to your childhood that you would love to see idolized and brought to life in a positive and grand fashion like this. Now, if you'd like to follow that journey along, if you don't already, you can find me at toddlawson.com. You can also find me on the standard social channels, whether it's Instagram or Facebook at Todd Lawson Art. And I'm also on YouTube, where this video is going to be living, and all the standard channels. Thank you.